Hey there, everyone, and welcome. I'm Errol Barnett. The rules are now set for House Democrats' impeachment inquiry into President Trump. The House voted on and approved guidelines for the investigation. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced the results on the House floor Thursday morning.
On this vote, the yeas are 232. The nays are 196. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Now, the votes passed mostly along party lines. 231 Democrats and 1 independent voted in favor of the measure, while every Republican and 2 Democrats from districts that voted for the president opposed the measure. Some of those rules of the resolution are as follows. It allows the current investigations into the president to continue. The House Intelligence Committee can make depositions that have already occurred public. And the resolution will let the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees set up public hearings. It also allows the White House some powers for the judiciary hearings as well. House Democratic leaders addressed the vote earlier Thursday. Here's what Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff had to say.
The Founding Fathers understood that a leader might take hold of the Oval Office who would sacrifice the national security, who would fail to defend the Constitution, who would place his personal or political interests above the interests of the country. They understood that might happen. And they provided a mechanism to deal with it, and that mechanism is called impeachment. We take no joy in having to move down this road and proceed with the impeachment inquiry, but neither do we shrink from it.
Now, Republicans had insisted Democrats hold a vote on the impeachment inquiry, but today they say the rules that have been laid out are unfair. Here's House Minority Whip Steve Scalise.
When you look at this Soviet-style process, it shows you that they don't really want to get to the truth. They want to remove a sitting president. In fact, the author of the articles of impeachment said, if they don't impeach the president, he will get reelected. Now, that's not why we have impeachment. Alexander Hamilton made it very clear. His concern when they were trying to promote the Constitution was that he didn't want to see impeachment used for political purposes. Yet that's what happened today. He predicted it, and it happened today. It's a sham. It shouldn't have happened. It's a tainted process.
I'll take a look at this statement released by the White House reiterating its stance that the president has done nothing wrong. Mr. Trump sent a tweet immediately after the vote, calling it, quote, the greatest witch hunt in American history. Now, today's vote did not stop lawmakers from pressing forward with their investigations either. Tim Morrison, a second senior member for the National Security Council, testified before several House committees. Morrison had listened to President Trump's July call with Ukraine's leader. Now, Morrison's call corroborates the testimony of Bill Taylor. He's the top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine. In his appearance, Taylor provided a detailed account of how the president tried to pressure Ukraine to investigate his potential 2020 political rival, Joe Biden. Now let's bring in Jill Colvin and Sheryl Stolberg. Jill is a White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Sheryl's a congressional reporter for the New York Times. Welcome to you both. What a day to try and digest what's taken place. Sheryl, I want to begin with you. We kind of tried to spell out the powers inside this resolution, but if you could better summarize it for us, what powers do Democrats now have they didn't have yesterday?
Well, in essence, this resolution lays out the path going forward for Democrats. So it doesn't necessarily give them any new powers that they didn't have yesterday, but what it does is lay out a process, and it in fact gives Republicans some powers. The resolution authorizes the committee, the Intelligence Committee, to continue its inquiry. It authorizes the Intelligence Committee to prepare a report that it will then turn over to the House Judiciary Committee. That's the committee that will consider drafting articles of impeachment. The resolution also gives Republicans the right to subpoena documents and witnesses, and it lays out how President Trump's lawyers can participate in the proceedings ongoing. However, Republicans object. They say that the resolution does not afford them unlimited ability to subpoena witnesses and documents, and that their subpoena ability is, in essence, under the thumb of Adam Schiff, the congressman who heads the Intelligence Committee. he's got veto power over whether or not they can issue subpoenas, and they are not happy about that.
And Jill, one of the big issues with the position Republicans have taken and the White House is that the complaint seems to, or at least on the Capitol Hill, the complaint seems to be about the process, not about the substance of what President Trump was trying to get out of Ukraine in order to release millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. I'm just wondering, what's been the scene at the White House today? Are you detecting any change in strategy or mood there?
Well, I think you lay it out there perfectly. The White House really painted itself into a corner here. We've heard all day from the president, from White House aides, from the president's re-election campaign, the same kind of language that we've heard over the last couple of weeks, calling this a sham impeachment inquiry, insisting that the president did nothing wrong. But what we'd also heard over the last number of weeks were all of these complaints about the process. The president and his aides complaining that these interviews were taking place behind closed doors, accusing Democrats of selectively leaking material in order to make the president and the White House look bad. And what you've had today is a vote doing exactly what the White House asked them to do. The White House demanded that they take this vote to formalize the impeachment process. Now these proceedings are going to be happening in public. The Democrats basically took the president's bait and said, fine, if that's what you want, that's what we're going to do for this second phase of the inquiry, which has really had a lot of White House staffers kind of tripping over their words as they've made various appearances here at the White House. So far, they are attempting to kind of pivot to a defense of the president's conduct. We've heard since the beginning even these constant references to the transcript of the phone call saying, look, we released this. You can read it for yourself. You can see, in our opinion, the president did nothing wrong. But what they are not addressing at this point is the content of all of those witness testimonies. What witness after witness has described, their perception that there was an attempt here at quid pro quo with various attempts to pressure the Ukrainian government to investigate the Biden family.
In some ways, you wonder if President Trump is just banking on his hardcore supporters who, approve of what he does and how he does it. It just doesn't seem that will be enough to get you through an impeachment process. Sheryl, many of the swing district Democrats who are on the fence ultimately voted for this measure. And you wrote prior to the vote that Democrats who were once wary of the partisan nature of the vote are now unified. We have it on our screen where you write, quote, "The change reflects Speaker Nancy Pelosi's close hold over her caucus," end quote. I'm just wondering, are Democratic lawmakers now a bit more confident in Pelosi's ability to lead them through this, considering the president was banking on these swing district Democrats staying lock and step with him?
Right. Well, I think a couple of things have changed. One thing that has changed is that there's been this mountain of evidence coming out suggesting that the president pressured Ukraine to help him smear his political rivals. The public does seem to be in support of the fact-finding mission, not wholeheartedly in support. The public is mostly split, Democrats versus Republicans, but nonetheless, we're seeing support from independents growing. So that is making Democrats more confident that they can go forward and not suffer consequences in these swing districts, some of them which have been won by President Trump. I think it is kind of a vindication of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's strategy. She has always said, let's go slow, let's build the evidence, we're not going to rush into things, we're going to have a fact-driven process. And, little by little, as this process has unfolded and support has built, she has managed to bring her caucus together. And it was very striking today that there were only 2 Democrats who broke ranks and voted with Republicans. Both are centrists. One is Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey, and the other is Colin Peterson of Minnesota. Both will have tough re-election races. Van Drew, in particular, has been very strongly opposed to impeachment. But that's a pretty small number of defections for a caucus that, until really just a couple of weeks ago, was very nervous about having this kind of impeachment vote.
And do you get the sense it changes the Senate calculation of all? After all, that is where the final vote on this will be.
You know, I do not get the sense just yet that it has changed the Senate calculation. Of course, there'll be a lot of testimony to come out. There'll be public hearings. We will see how this unfolds in the weeks to come. But I think if the vote in the Senate were to happen today, I think you would be hard-pressed to say that President Trump would be convicted by a Republican-led Senate run by Mitch McConnell. Republicans in the House and the Senate are still pretty strongly behind the president, and we're also hearing Republicans in the House address the substance of these allegations, saying, you know what, the president was right to withhold military aid from Ukraine. He was just trying to determine whether or not taxpayer money was being spent wisely.
Now, Jill, you were discussing earlier that the White House has just been arguing about the process and not the substance. There are a lot of questions about why President Trump has still yet to set up a war room, a kind of separately cordoned off team of individuals who can deal with the impeachment inquiry while the business of the country is being run. The most recent president to experience something in a similar situation was Bill Clinton in the late 90s. Do you get any sense that there's an increased interest in the White House now to follow that lead?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're starting to see now. For weeks you've had, administration officials, allies of the president outside the building growing increasingly concerned that they just did not have the capacity and the staff to be able to deal with this at the level that they wanted to see them dealing with it. They continuously pointed to the Clinton administration and the way that they'd set up a team of PR and legal professionals who were able to answer reporters' questions, who were able to address the developments each and every day. And what we've heard now is that the White House is still considering bringing on additional communication staffers, potentially new lawyers to join the team. It's something certain individuals here have been pushing for. It will, of course, be up to the president to sign off on this. In a situation we have, again and again at this White House, is the president really feels like he is his best spokesperson. And he goes out there and he sets the message. He answers reporters' questions. He tweets his immediate reaction or live tweets his thoughts about a hearing that's ongoing. So it makes it a pretty difficult job for folks who work in his communications office to constantly be making sure that they're on the same page as the president, making sure that things that they tell reporters aren't then going to be contradicted by the president. So it's a difficult job to feel, but it does seem like that's something that they're getting close to moving forward with.
It just is still a stunning and remarkable feature of the Trump presidency 3 years in that he does things the way he wants to do it, how he wants to do it, and ultimately trusts his own gut, not anyone he even has appointed. I mean, his chief of staff is acting Mick Mulvaney at the moment. Sheryl, I want to ask you about these hearings that continue in Congress. There are more set up for Monday. Tim Morrison testified today, a top advisor with the National Security Council on matters related to Russia. He resigned yesterday. What did we learn from him?
Well, what we learned from him is that he supported the account of an earlier official who testified and who said that President Trump indeed did engage in a quid pro quo, withholding military aid from Ukraine in exchange for, or in an effort to press Ukraine's President Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden. Morrison said that a top diplomat close to the president, Gordon Sondland, told him of this quid pro quo, and he is just one more in a string of witnesses who have corroborated the initial anonymous account from a whistleblower who said that there was this kind of quid pro quo, tit for tat, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours arrangement or scheme in which the president was holding back military aid that Ukraine desperately needed until he got an assurance that the Bidens would be investigated. So if these accounts are accurate and if they come forth in public hearings, I think they will be very damning for the president. Of course, we don't know what other testimony has come out, so we'll see if a counter-narrative develops. But these witnesses are not really helping the president's case, as best we can tell by the reports that are leaking out.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention a potential counter-narrative. We just haven't heard it, other than President Trump saying the call was perfect, the call was fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's true that we haven't heard it. Congressman Mark Meadows, a very close ally of the president today, told me that today's witness, Morrison, actually contradicted some of the testimony of Alexander Vindman, who is the National Security Council staffer and Ukrainian immigrant who testified the other day, kind of explosive testimony, again suggesting that there was this quid pro quo and also that he felt that it was improper for the president to be withholding this aid. How Morrison may have contradicted Vindman, we don't know. Meadows wouldn't say, and we know these hearings are closed and members are not supposed to talk about what happens in them. So I guess that also would be filed under the wait and see category.
And for you, Jill, the Washington Post reports that Alexander Vindman testified. John Eisenberg, the White House's chief legal advisor on national security issues, moved the transcript of the call between President Trump and Ukraine's leader to this classified server. What issues does that cause for the president? I mean, what does that prove?
Looks like from the Washington Post reporting of that account that what is alleged here is that Eisenberg, who is one of the top lawyers at the White House, a long-time Republican official, he served in the Bush administration, long-time kind of well-respected lawyer, that he apparently decided that maybe it would be better if certain people didn't see this transcript, to be able to limit the audience that would be able to look at it, because he had been flagged that there were deep concerns among people in the building that what the president had done was ill-advised. And so at this point, we need to see who else testifies what. But if there is a pattern established that officials sort of misused this secret, separate server in order to shield the president from embarrassment and potentially, change the classification settings or acted that way, it just adds this other layer, this idea that people around the president were trying to protect him, in essence, from his own behavior, from himself, not wanting that to get public.
Yeah, and we just cannot be lost on the fact that this is a historic moment for the country right now. Jill Colvin and Sheryl Stolberg, we appreciate you explaining some of the details and nuance from today. Thank you.
Thanks.